Yeah, we're live and in focus now, which is really good. It's a good way to start off. Hope you guys are all doing well. Tonight we're going to talk about lots of cool stuff. The first thing is turbo cam timing. And the reason I want to talk about that is because I've been taking a look at a lot of I've been looking for a new cam upgrade for the 3800 Series 3 V6, also for the Series 2 V6. And I'm going to, one of the next tests I want to do is upgrade the camshaft. So we're going to put a camshaft in. I'll run the camshaft with the supercharger, obviously, and then show what that does. I also want to run the thing naturally aspirated, so we can just show what the stock one does NA, and then what it does cammed NA, and then hopefully what it does supercharged with the camshaft, and then also hopefully with a turbo. And the thing that, in looking at the things that are available now for this 3800, I obviously took a look at the Comp Cams catalog. We looked at the ZZ Performance and Intense and a lot of different places for different camshafts. And one of the things that I noticed was their changeover from NA cams to blower cams, and then especially the big change was really to turbo cams. And when they were listing the turbo cams for the 3800 Series 2 and 3 V6 for the L67 and the L32, they listed a number of reverse pattern cams. And by reverse pattern cams, if you don't know what I'm talking about, normally camshafts will take the specs from the cam, like the Ford cam that I like to use. It's a 224-232 at 50. It's kind of a normal split. And on a single pattern cam, obviously it would be 224-224. And on a reverse pattern cam, the exhaust is going to be even smaller than the intake duration. So on a reverse pattern cam, it might be 224-216 or 220, something that's just smaller than whatever the intake duration is. And I've done lots and lots of testing on this, and we've talked about this a couple of times, that occasionally I will use a single pattern cam, like on that torque cam from Brian Tooley. It worked very well if I'm trying to make a lot of low speed power. The single pattern cam worked well. It can also improve idle quality, and on that 202 cam, for instance, they even tightened up the LSA, which adds low speed power and mid range power. And because the cam is so mild, in that case, it can still have a really good idle. As you go up in duration, that becomes more and more problematic in terms of idle quality. But my question is, and I don't really understand, and I know that they want to offer different cams for different applications, and that they want to be able to tell people, hey, if you're putting a turbo on there, you need a completely different kind of camshaft. And what I would like to do is I would like to test those. I would like to run a test where we maintain the same intake duration. So we run a 224-232 cam, a 224-224 cam, and then a 224 something less than 224, a 218 cam. And what I would do if I were doing the test, I don't know that I'll be able to do this on the V6. I don't know if I'll be able to get all of these cams. But if I were to do that, what I would do is run them all NA. And then because of that V6, because we have everything for it, I would also be able to run them all supercharged and then all turbocharged. And my suspicion is what we would find is that, like we always find, and especially in this kind of duration range and this kind of, aggressiveness of camshaft, that in a street style camshaft like this, that the cam that makes the most power NA then is also going to do that with either forms of those forced induction, and subsequently also with nitrous too. And I have run that test before. I've run it on an LS. I take that back. What I have done on an LS is I've run a camshaft, and we've run it with NA, we've run it with a blower, with the turbo, and with nitrous. And guess what? It worked with all of those, and that shouldn't come as a big surprise anymore. And I suspect that if we were to run that's what we'd see. Now, we've tested dual pattern versus single pattern cams quite often, and every time we've run that test, we've run across the same situation. We run across where the dual pattern cam makes more power, especially at the top, than the single pattern cam does. Not very often does the single pattern cam make more power down low, although I'm sure that that's certainly possible. And I would suspect, and I've run this once before, way back with a Ford, where we ran a reverse split camshaft, and it just made less power, as I would expect it to. Having a lot less exhaust duration, I would just expect it to make less power, and quite possibly less power everywhere. I mean, again, maybe because we're eliminating, depending on what we're doing with the duration, we might be eliminating overlap. Maybe way down low we could pick up something, and possibly that's what they're trying to do with these camshafts, is try to improve turbo response possibly. But my guess is that that's not what would happen, and I would like to test that, and I would like to demonstrate whether and I could certainly do that on an LS, but it would probably be more interesting and more telling on the V6, because the V6, especially for a given turbo size, would need more low-speed power for turbo response to get the thing up and going, especially if we didn't, like we did before, run a compound system where we had the supercharger to kind of artificially add all the power that we needed down low. So I think it would be an interesting test. The other thing, and the reason I was going off down this rabbit hole, is I was taking a look at some of the old data that I had, because I run recently the L32, the Series 3, with the Gen 5 blower on the 3800. Now, way back, we had also run testing on an L67, so the previous generation with the earlier blower. But we had very similar power results, actually, and we had very similar. The initial reason that I went back to take a look at that data is because I was curious about the boost curves, because when we ran this last series of testing on the L32 version, we had a lower boost at our starting point, and then it kind of rose with RPM, and then rose a lot at the end, which is what we have come to expect with positive displacement blowers on stock cammed motors, because they get very inefficient because they have really mild cam timing, and the blower is pumping more air and becoming more inefficient at higher speeds. And so we get that manifests itself as a rise in boost pressure at the end. Now, the way that we get rid of that is put a good camshaft in. If we make the motor more efficient, the boost comes down, and it doesn't seem to be quite as aggravated at the top. The other way we can do that is a ported head, both of the things which I want to employ. But I went back and looked at the data the previous day from the L67, and I saw exactly the same thing. We had exactly this same rising curve that started at around 4 or 4.5 pounds, and then rose up at the end to whatever our peak number is, 8, 10, 12, whatever, depending on which pulley ratio we used. And we ran a number of pulleys back then. We ran the 3.8, we ran a 3.6, a 3.4, a 3.2. We may have even gone down to a 3.0. I thought a 3.2 was the smallest that we ran, but we just went up and up in boost. And the same thing happened. It elevated the boost everywhere, which you'd expect of a pulley change, but it was still lower at the beginning, and then quite a bit higher at the end. So it showed the same boost curve. I also back then tested an intercooler. We tested headers. We ran a few different tests, and I was concerned with some of the data back then, because we were trying to run a Tech 2 management system, and we were struggling a little bit with the tuning on it. And the way that the results came out, and meaning that we didn't really get very much of a change. Like, for instance, when we ran the headers, it just showed no change at all, similar to what I showed when we just ran this L32, the same thing. So I thought that seemed really odd. I wonder if something is going on. I wonder if we're not being able to reproduce the same timing curve or air fuel curve or something like that, even though we were showing it in the data. I just was suspect of the whole Tech 2 system, and it wasn't working out very well. But as it turned out, I think it was fairly accurate. Same thing with the intercooler. We put an intercooler basically in place of not having an intercooler, and it didn't show hardly any power change. It showed a little bit of a change in boost, just like the headers did. And the thing that worked when I did the L32 also worked on the L67. When we turned the boost up, it made more power. And then especially the case on the L67, I made an adapter plate to put a Kenny Bell on there. And when we put the Kenny Bell on there, and I can't remember if it was a 1.5, it probably was a 1.5 or a 1.7 or something. It wasn't one of the bigger ones, but it didn't need to be for this 300 horsepower motor. When we put the Kenny Bell on there, the boost went up, and it made more power, and did kind of exactly what we would expect it to. It's a more efficient blower. It can support more power. It's bigger and it's more efficient. So it kind of had everything going for it. And then the same thing happened when we added the turbo on this. So after looking at that data, I was like, well, the thing that this thing really needed was a camshaft. I even tried back then. I tried ported heads, and again, we had somebody that had ported the heads, and we put them in there. I don't remember. I'd have to go back. This was, 10 or 20 years ago, probably. I don't remember what the flow numbers were on the heads, but they were fully ported and the chambers were polished and stuff. I think we used stock valve sizes. We didn't increase the valve size. But again, when we put the heads on, we just really didn't see much of a difference in power. And I thought that was odd. And it all points back to, which is why I was looking at it, was the camshaft. So when I was looking at the cams, I was looking at the different size cams. First of all, we looked up the data on the factory cam timing, and it's really, really mild. Anytime you have duration figures in the 180s, you know it's going to be, it's pretty weak. And they could rely on the blower to do their stuff. The other thing that made me go back and search this is when I was looking for camshafts for this 3800, I went back and looked at how much a cam change made on the 4.3 liter V6 that I did when we did the Torque Storm supercharger. So I ran that 4.3. There was a balance shaft motor, a Vortec headed motor, and we ran that with a carbureted induction system. It had the Edelbrock intake on it and Edelbrock carburetor on there, and we ran that. I didn't have headers. We just had the stock exhaust manifolds. We ran that with a stock cam, and then we ran it with a Magnum, like a 220 cam, but it gained almost 50 horsepower. So it was a very big change in power from just the camshaft, even given the stock heads, because there were just no work done to the stock 4.3 liter heads other than they were, we'd surface them and did a valve job, just prep them for being new stock heads, basically. So I'm kind of excited about the potential of what a camshaft can do in the 3800. So that's when I went down this rabbit hole and just started looking at all the different available things. And I found a big listing of supposedly all of the cams that are available. And again, despite the fact that these guys have been in business for a long time, that I was looking at and probably have done lots of testing, I'm hoping I would still just look to putting the cam that I would put in it when I started all this was a mid 500 lift, a 224, 232. And then I started thinking about the LSA, would I maybe tighten it up a little bit for an NA one? Would I widen it up a little bit for a supercharged application to get it to be better out at the top, which is typically what they do for forced induction deals, especially roots blowers, what all the factory LS stuff is doing. Or would I do middle of the road? And no matter what I did, it's going to work on all of them. It's just going to maybe be not ideal for any of them. But it obviously will work with all of them. So, just picking the specs for that extreme energy 274 cam that I use in the Ford and building that kind of camshaft for the 3800, I think would work really, really well. They have bigger camshafts, and I might employ that with, when we would eventually do a big bang, because I want to do a big bang on one of these. And what I'll probably do is sacrifice the L67 that I have there, and I might do the L32, who knows? But because we're definitely going to run, the other thing I want to do are ported heads. Now I don't want to spend, excuse me. I was taking a look at the cost of the ported heads from some of these guys, and these guys are wanting like $1,500 to $2,000 for, their ultimate set of ported heads, and I just think that that's a lot of money for heads that I'm not really going to care about, or that we're possibly going to damage if we do a big bang thing. So I don't probably have the budget for that. So I might have somebody locally here port some, and we could put, we could go up in valve size. We could put some 1900s or 155s or something. That a 1900 157 seems to be the valve upgrade that they put in that. The thing that I do like, and this is one of the things I put in the thumbnail and the description on this, are some of the little things that you have to look at. Like when you're looking at the cylinder heads, when I do a camshaft upgrade, naturally we have to do whatever cam I put in. It's going to be something that's going to be less than 550 lift probably. Whatever cam we put in it, it's going to need valve springs. So one of the cheap upgrades for this thing, if I put a small cam in it, like one of the comp has some stuff that they have a 191 202. They have a 201, 205, and then a 210, 220. They have some small cams, and they're probably the guys that grind them for everybody else as well. So They have some small cams, but one of the good upgrades for these things is just to put an LS6 valve spring in it. So I probably have used LS6 or LY6, some of the factory springs I could put in there. Or we could also put, which I think I might have a set of 26918 comp beehive springs. And then I think we also use the LS1 style retainer, which I've got lots of stock ones of those that we've taken out of all of the 5.3 when we've done spring upgrades on them. So we could do that and change the springs and change the cams at the same time, and all of that should work out very well. I'm looking forward to the cam upgrade, especially after seeing how much power that Magnum cam, which is a single pattern cam, and it's a Magnum, it's an old design, how much power that thing gained on the 4.3 liter. Because if we could get 40 or 50 horsepower with a cam upgrade on the 3800, which I think is certainly possible, because I need to go back and look at the factory cam timing on the 4.3 liter Vortec motor. I think that the cam timing on the 4.3 liter Vortec motor, given the fact that it was made 200 horsepower NA, probably was already bigger than the 3800. So relatively speaking, we would be making an even bigger jump in camshaft with if we went with something that was like a 220 or 224 at 50 on the intake side. So I'm really excited about that, and I think that I'm hoping that the stock head doesn't hold it back too much. And again, I'd like to do a ported head, but I'm not going to do an $1,800 set of stage 3 or stage 4 heads. If they want to supply them, I would be happy to test them and give them back, because I don't want them. I would just like to run the test on them. But we will be able to do the camshaft, and if we do get, an extra 50 horsepower, which NA, which I think is possible, then the gains that we would get under boost should be even more. And then we would start seeing some fairly interesting power numbers, even with just the blower. Then we could take advantage of some of these pulley changes. And the other thing that I want to run is I have a snow water meth injection system on the one that we ran on the Engine Master show that we did when we tested on the LS. I think that this would be a good application for it, for two reasons. One, we would inject it in front of the blower, which we would get good cooling from. The other thing that would happen is this is rather than a convoluted long runner intake that was never designed to flow any sort of fuel like the LS was when we tested it, I don't think we'll have nearly as bad a distribution problem with a big, basically open plenum under the blower and very, very short runners. So I think that from a water mess standpoint, it probably would work better on the supercharged combination. I could, of course, run an intercooler on there, but what I'm really prepping all of this stuff for is I would like this motor to make more NA power, so that when we put an NA intake manifold on it, which, by the way, I'm talking about the small things like the valve springs. The other thing that will have to happen if we put an NA intake manifold on here is I'll have to pick a good one. I'd probably look at the one from the Firebird or the Camaro, the 3.8 liter, or one of the NA transverse ones as well. They've got a couple of different ones. All of those have the injectors in the manifold, and this one has the injectors in the head, meaning we're going to have two sets of injectors in there, and that's not a problem. We just plug the holes. But the thing is, they both have to be secured down, because if we run a turbo blowing through the intake manifold, they're both going to be under boost. I probably won't try to run both sets of them, although I think it would be interesting if I need to look at some of these manifolds to see if there's a way that I could position the manifold or position the injectors somewhere else in the manifold to get more fuel, to get the fuel injection farther away from the valve, and then take advantage of some additional cooling. That may or may not be more beneficial. We're going to be running E85 for most of this testing, maybe until we get up to the big bang stuff. Then we might switch over to, C16 or 118 or something like that. And then in which case we would also switch over to ice water in our air to water intercooler. But if we can get this motor making, between 250 and 300 horsepower NA, then we start seeing some fairly good things once we add boost, once we add the turbo. And especially if we add the 85 on top of that, and then we add, which the 85 will be more beneficial under boost, but if we add the 85 on top of that, and then ice water and intercooler, then we can start seeing some fairly good power gains. But the other thing we'll have to do when we really start turning the boost up. And I'm surprised already we've run over 20 pounds, 23 pounds on the compound setup on that 3800 with the turbo and the blower. And we ran it with those Fel-Pro head gaskets, which I cannot be designed for that, I wouldn't think. So we want to put some Cometic MLS gaskets, obviously in ARP headsets. We just reused the factory bolts on this when we did it. And, I don't think that that's ideal for us trying to really ramp this thing up. But I'm excited about it. It'll be interesting. I like the fact that we're starting off with basically a bottom of the barrel kind of camshaft. It's really, really mild. And so we have nowhere to go but up with cam timing, especially if we put something in the 224 range or so at 50 on the intake side, and then 232-ish on the exhaust side, and like a 550 lift deal. I think that thing's going to make some good power on the 3800. And I'm excited also to see, and I want to do these tests one at a time, I'm excited to see what the head does. Because we'll do the valve springs on the stock head, put the cam in, then if we had ported heads, then we would do the ported heads. So the ported heads could take advantage of the cam that was already there. And ideally, I would want to do the ported heads after we put in whatever the biggest kind of camshaft that we can run in there. I don't know what the available piston to valve clearance is on this motor. I've never measured it, so we'll get a chance to do that. We'll probably have to put a checker spring on there and find out how much piston to valve clearance we have. The other thing that I want to look at, again, the little things that I was talking about that you have to go through all this. There's a lot of recommendations to change the timing gear, the timing set on this. I haven't taken a look at the factory one. Obviously, I don't know how many miles are on it. It's probably worn. Every LS motor I've ever taken apart has the sloppiest chain you can imagine. And when you put a brand new one on, it just starts out that way. So I don't know how these V6s are, but I think that there are double roller timing chains available for them. So we could put something like that in there and make it toy like a Toyga. So that will be another. Then one of the other upgrades that I saw is people are putting LS7 lifters in these. I kind of understand that, although we won't change the lifters on this, and we likely will not change the push rods either. I don't think. Maybe we will. Maybe we'll put a hardened push rod on there when we go up a lot in valve spring. It's looking to me like this head is going to accept, in addition to a Beehive LS spring or 26918, also a dual spring setup, which is probably going to be real similar to the LS stuff anyway. We could obviously, if it doesn't just readily accept it, we could obviously machine the head to make sure that that's the case. So lots of cool stuff. And then I want you guys to let me know what you think on which intake manifolds you think we should run. I'm only going to run a couple of them. Intake manifolds should not be very hard on this motor when we're running just the turbo. So it might be interesting to try a couple. And so let me know what you guys think, what we should run, and everybody else watching this video after the live feed, if you want to chime in, throw some comments up there and let me know what 3800 intake manifolds you'd like to see run. There are lots of them. Every time I go to the wrecking yard, when I'm looking for motors, I'm always looking, even when I'm not looking for one, I always look at the supercharged. I always look for supercharged stuff. And then what I invariably find are lots and lots of NA ones. And depending on the different years, there seem like there are a number of aluminum ones. There's a number of composite ones. And then we have the rear wheel drive ones from the Camaro and the Firebird. So it seems like there's maybe 5 or 6 different intake manifolds to choose from. So let me know if there's one that we like more than the others. I know some guys want me to just get rid of the rotor pack and just run the blower, and we could try that. It's not going to be very good because of the short runners. It's just not going to make nearly as much power as it should, especially through most of the RPM range. We've done that a lot on. I remember doing way back with Oscar Jackson, doing the Focus supercharger kits that he had. He had the Eaton M45s and the M62s on the Focus and on the Hondas, and he just used the really short runners on them. And they always did the same thing. It just kills all of the torque production from the runner length. And it'd been nice, although it's very difficult. I know why he did it, because of packaging, because you've got to put an intake manifold in there and a blower and a bypass valve and all the stuff. And you just can't fit, 10 or 15 inches of runner length like you would want to put in there. It just doesn't package as well. But since we're blowing through the turbo, we can package it on the engine dyno and it won't be a problem. So let's find out what you guys are doing and we'll get to talking. Let's see. Have you ever built a motor with so much cylinder pressure it blows the plug leads off of the plugs? Blows the plug leads off? Are you talking about it blows the spark plug out, like out of the head, or that it knocks off the electrode? Or I don't know what you're talking about. If it knocks off an electrode, that's not cylinder pressure. That's usually detonation if it does that. DFA 3800, do you have a Camaro intake? I don't have one, but we see them a lot at the wrecking yards, and we'll probably just go get one. Bolt the intake, the heads, and extrude on it after it's assembled. The heads will limit your power level. Can an LM7 block be bored to 4-inch bore? I'm told, Ken, that's a good idea. I actually want to do that. I'm told that it can. I've never done it. I've always been told that when we sonic check them that they're too thin to do that. I think you probably can, and there still will be a wall there. Maybe it's only 60 thousandths on one side and 120 on the other. You would have to have it checked to make sure. And I think it would be okay to run it NA, but most guys don't do it under boost. So yes, on the Camaro Firebird manifold. Okay, that's one of the ones I was looking at anyway, because it's going to position the throttle body forward. I have more Honda testing. I haven't just posted videos on it. I have tuned an engine and had the laptop tell me that the danger sign came up. It actually says that as I walk in. James, your Turbo LY6 Trailblazer SS popped into their piston. We tuned and raced the track 15 pounds. The headlight remove was fine on street with headlight in. Owner ran at the track and headlight and it popped. So it's got to be a tune problem, man. I actually loved my Focus. I had I think it was a 2002. I'm thinking something like that. The Z-Tech motor, and it was a stick. And we put a turbo on it. We put a blower on it. We put heads, we did all kinds of crazy stuff on it. We even had a motor in there that we ran on the chassis dyno that made over 500 at the tire with a turbo on it with a Pectel system that my buddy Nathan came and tuned for us. And it all worked really good. My sons used to call it the loud car because we had to open, big exhaust on it and stuff. But when we ran the blower on it, we eventually made 230 or 40 or 50 horsepower at the tire, I think, with the M62 blower on it. But it took a lot. It took cams and ported head and all kinds of stuff. And then eventually what I did was we just put a turbo on it, put an F-Max kit on it. And then the thing was a lot of fun. It made driving around, because all of the Honda and Acura guys used to pick on the Focus guys because they were pretty easy prey. The Focus was heavy. It didn't make very much power. And anybody with any kind of VTEC motor would really kind of beat up on the Focus. But after I put the turbo on it, then I could work over a lot of guys. It was pretty fun. Have Wilson do a sheet metal intake for the 3800. That would be good. Hey, Keith, buddy, come on, just for me. Come on. Frank, you're building a Toyota 2.7 turbo on methanol. That should work good. So if you're doing on methanol, I'm assuming that it's for high boost stuff. You should try running methanol on the 3800. I've never run methanol on anything that I can remember. Did you already cover overlap in the turbo setups? Yeah, well, we covered it briefly, and my take on that is whatever the motor does NA with the camshaft, and you add boost to that, it's just going to add to that. Stop worrying about overlap. Cams that have overlap work really well on turbo applications. Every cam that I've ever run on an LS, almost every cam has had boost put on it, and it works perfect. Norris, I'm looking for a cam, 427 big block Chevy, 88 millimeter, looking for 8,500, no prep racing. Well, why is it you're looking for 8,500? Are you thinking that it's going to run better ETs or better mile an hour or something because you're running a lot of engine speed? If you're looking for an 8,500 RPM cam, you need to talk to Billy or somebody at Comp. It's going to be you're going to have to really work on the ramp rate of the cam and the stability, and then tailor that with the valve spring combination. I've never tested a 5-liter Holden V8. There's you don't need to worry about how much is too much. Like I said, PBREI. If you look at a camshaft like we're talking about, I've run cams that are like the camshaft that we ran in the, and you can calculate you could go in and back calculate the amount of overlap that the cam has. But we've run all the way from stock cams, which have no overlap, which have negative overlap, all the way to the biggest cam that we normally run is something that fits in available piston to valve clearance, factory piston to valve clearance, would be something like that 469 comp cam or something thereabout, something 231, 232 at 50 on the intake, and then as much as 248 on the exhaust. And that's going to be on a 113 or 114. So that camshaft has made 1,500 horsepower with turbos. So it's going to have, if you just look at the overlap number, it's going to have, relatively speaking, a lot of overlap. Certainly a lot more than a stock cam. Certainly a lot more than most of the turbo cams or the blower cams, like an LS9 cam. It's going to have more overlap. But you need to not think that overlap is bad for a turbo combination. The thing that I like about the Camaro NA 3800 intake manifold is that it has runner length. We need runner length because if we're only running to 6,000 or even 6,500 RPM, if we put enough camshaft in it and a ported head, you need runner length for that. You don't need an inch or two of runner length like the factory blower manifold has. You need, 10, 15 inches or so of runner length to get it to work right. I don't know if does anybody know if the Holden V8s, do they have the same intake manifolds as we have here in the States? On the 3800, somebody's asking. On the NA one, I would assume. Joseph, which is better, iron or aluminum? LS NA 416 will be run with higher compression. On an NA motor, I'd pick an aluminum one just because you want the lighter weight too. And since you're not trying to max out the potential or strength of the engine of the block, then I would use aluminum. Nice. That's right. You're training them young. T. Captain Bubba, I had a 1990 4.3-liter Typhoon. Very cool. I used a Calcams 262, 264, 106 LSA. That's pretty tight. And a 4-barrel Holley and a turbo. Then I added nitrous and headers. Perfect. Oh, so he left the headlight in. The inlet air temps went through the roof and detonated. Is he not running an intercooler on that? James, but if you're talking about only a 20-degree change in inlet air temperature, you should have that much of a window for detonation. Can you compare a 650 horsepower NA versus a 650 horse turbo dynograph? Yeah, I probably have both of those. This character limit. I know. Is there any situation where a boost cam is useful or preferable? I think that there probably is. I just haven't found it in the range of stuff that we've been running. There might be for really high boost levels. There might also be for applications where you have a limit, like a class limit for a given turbo. So then you might want to tailor the camshaft around what that limitation is. Somebody did a super chat, and I'm trying to find it. Oh, there we go. Rex did. Thank you very much. So I need a Rex. What size turbo or turbos would you use on a 496 750 horsepower AFR headed big block Chevy? No specific brand, just right now size about 15 pounds. So does the 496 already make 750 horsepower? If it does, that's really good. And then how much power do you want from it when you're adding the boost? If you only want 750 horsepower, that's really easy. Then that's just an S480 or an 88. If you want to add to a 750 horsepower NA motor and then make lots of power, then two S475s or two S480s would work. So I want to go right back up here. Do you have any theory on why GM went with the LS2 as a base for the LS9 instead of the LS7? Do you think that the wall thickness is the only reason? And if so, doing an LS6 bottom end correct that? The LS7 block is probably going to be a lot more expensive than the LS2 is. And so that's probably why they went with it. And then the LS9 was probably, they could make the power that they wanted and the reliability that they wanted for the price that they wanted. That's what I would think about that. I don't think it has to do with strength. I think that they researched all of that and figured out what would work. Ken, if you're trying, I wouldn't bore those if you're the guy that was asking about boring the blocks, and you're trying to make 1,000 horsepower, I wouldn't bore them for boost. You just run the standard stock displacement, or go 10 or 20 or 30 over on it and put pistons in it if you're going to put pistons in it, and then run boost on it. The boost will get you what you want. You don't need the displacement to do that. Do you think 450 horsepower out of a 403 is possible all motor? Yes, it is possible. Guys were doing it in the old Grand National stuff. I think that theirs were 5-liter motors displacements, but they were making a lot more power than that. And it is, if you put a solid roller cam in it and an altered valve angle head on it and the right intake manifold and all that and lots of compression and a dry sump and all that is possible. The talk today wasn't LS. Actually, it was mostly 3800 V6. I got my grandson a 6.5 horsepower go-kart with slicks for Christmas. Very nice. How do I get him to be less scared of it? I can tell you what I did is I limited when I had my sons driving, not go-kart specifically, but we started off with power wheels and all that stuff. And what we did was just limited the amount of power. So on a go-kart, I just would put a throttle stop on it, so that it's not a 6.5 horsepower go-kart, so that it's only a 2 horsepower go-kart to begin with, and then get them feeling comfortable. And this is what we do when we're doing instruction out on the track too, is we get them comfortable going at the pace that they're comfortable with. And then once they start feeling that, then we start having them move up. That's why it's a lot better to learn to drive in a car that has no power, because if you have a car that has, like, if in a Corvette is a terrible car to teach somebody to drive in. It's an awesome car, and it handles well and it goes fast and it does all of those things, but it's way more car than 99% of the people, especially if they're just starting out, could handle. So get them started in like an old Neon or some front wheel drive piece of junk that has less than 100 horsepower, because it doesn't matter how fast you go on the straight. Everybody can go full throttle on the straight. But if you get them uncomfortable with that speed, then they're not going to be able to learn the things that they need to do to make that go around the corner. Like the 100 feet before and after the corner is kind of the critical spot for testing. Everybody knows how to go wide open throttle. That's an easy thing. And everybody knows how to go fast on the straightaway. The things that you have to do, like braking and turning and accelerating out of and all that stuff around the turns, is where it happens. And that's what we normally do, is make it have less power, and then make it less scary, and then work up to the scary. Holden has some nice looking 3800 manifolds, look similar to the early 60s Corvette manual. Oh, the Rochester stuff. I like those manifolds. That's actually a cool design. It's kind of a tunnel ram design. I've never run the Hemi with one spark plug disconnect. I get asked that question a lot, and I've never tried it. I would like to. Will you test air-to-water intercooler versus air-to-air intercooler on supercharger? We did that on the... I think I did that with a centrifugal blower. I haven't done it on a roots blower, but the result is the same thing. An air-to-air intercooler and an air-to-water intercooler, when we tested them on the turbo, at that boost level and power level, were very, very comparable. We were running, ambient water through the intercooler. It was much smaller than the air. The air-to-air was much bigger and sized for the power output, and they worked very similar. The nice thing about an air-to-water is that you can run ice water through it, and then you can't. And also for packaging, it can be much smaller. Robbie, the valve comp has good valve springs. They have the ovate, not the ovate wire. What do they have? They have conical valve springs for the Hemis, and they work really well. I ran them on the Hemi motor that I blew up. And if you're going to do a twin turbo 392 and you're trying to make a lot of power, I wouldn't go with a stage 1 turbo cam. I would go with a stage 2 NA or stage 2 something bigger than that. So inlet air temps were over 140, and and James, are you running 93 on that, or E85? That's what I was thinking, but didn't say. I need to know what the hot side is. Well, what turbos were you? The two S475s that we ran were T4s, and I'm thinking that they were... I can't remember if they were 1.0s or 96s. And yours was a 427. So what kind of power are you wanting to make? Did you tell me? Yeah, Blake, it obviously does affect the rear end alignment, huh? Limit the power. I was going to ask you what turbo and intercooler I should put on. We'll get to that. Ray, an 88 millimeter, an 8896 on a 5.3 should be able to make a lot more than 630 wheel horsepower. Are you limiting it in some other way, like with no timing, with intercooling, with a restrictive exhaust? Randy Pope's is like 17 different kinds of awesome. First of all, the guys are like, and it can be kind of rare when you talk about guys that have a lot of talent in driving. He's a really super cool guy, and he's a heck of a driver, and he can combine those two and talk on camera. He's funny, and he's good on camera and stuff. So the guy's got a lot of stuff going for him. The great place to learn how to drive is do it in the rain, because then you learn how to counter steer and stuff, and you could do it at really slow speeds. You could do it in parking lots and stuff. Can you test deceleration response with compression? I'm not sure if the engine dyno. No, because we don't. It doesn't slow the dyno down. Do they make small turbos for the 6.5 horsepower stuff? I mean, the smallest one I'm thinking of is like the little Sprint that I have, but they got to have smaller ones than that, right? Don't they have turbos for like the watercraft industry and stuff? Are you eventually going with standalone ECU with your Dodge hatch thing? The hatch thing. The Dodge Omni GLH, best car ever made. Probably not. It would probably will use the factory stuff because the factory is tunable. So if it is tunable, I can tune it. Sam, the process of selecting the right valve spring for that kind of application, it gets more detailed when you're looking at extreme things, like when you're looking for really high RPM, high lift stuff, lots of power. But for most things, what you need is you need to have, the first thing that you do for your spring is that you need to have, the spring needs to accept whatever valve lift the cam has. So if it is a 600 lift cam, you have to have a valve spring that won't coil bind before 600 lift. That's the first thing. The next thing is it has to have enough spring rate to work with whatever RPM range you're going to be running your camshaft in. So if you have a really mild stock cam, really it only needs to work to 5,500 or 6,000 RPM. If you have more camshaft than that and you're going to run it to 7,000, you have to have enough spring pressure to be able to do that. For your typical LS stuff, a 26918 Beehive spring from Comp Cams solves a lot of problems for milder cams. It would work with that stage 2 cam very easily. You could put a dual spring in it. Almost everybody sells something that would be work with a 600 or 650 or 660 lift spring, and they're all going to be, 140 to 160 pounds of seat pressure, and then 380 to 400 plus pounds of open pressure, and all of those will work. I would pick, for your application, I would pick the lighter of those. Excuse me, guys, for a second. The gurney bubble. The little IHI turbos. Yeah, I have a really tiny turbo on my Chevy Sprint, on the Sprint motor, but it's still, it was like 70 horsepower with the turbo on it. So it was turbocharging a motor that was probably 30, 40, 50 horsepower. Ray, not sure what would be limiting it. It's a Hooker turbo log manifold setup and a 4-inch downpipe. A T4 frame, but that we run T4 frames to 1,000 horsepower, so that's not a problem. Tune is spot on. I don't know, unless you have a valve float issue or some other kind of problem. Happy to help, Dan. What do you think of, Richard? What do you think about the Texas Speed Stage 2, 212, 218, 112? That's pretty standard kind of camshaft. I would imagine that it's a mid 500 lift cam. And that cam will work with a turbo. That's like the cam that we just put in the Dodge Magnum. It works fine. Yeah, 235, 243 is getting big on a 5.7. It doesn't need anywhere near that much camshaft for a turbo application. You could get away with a lot less camshaft than that. And then if you put 1,000 horsepower turbo on it, you could max out the turbo with a lot less cam than that. That cam means it's going to happen at a lower boost level. I could stick the Sprint motor in a lawnmower. That would be good. Yeah, gas powered leaf blower would be good. Oh, okay, cool. That's cool. That's good information. The smallest turbo for the Smart 4.2 first gen, it had an less than a 1 liter diesel engine, smallest engine, production engine maybe ever produced. Jason has a factory turbo. Oh, Yamaha Turbo Seika. That's an old school one, man. The The weirdest engine I have right now is that Pontiac 347 that I would like to run, but haven't been able to. I've got a 3rd gen 5.3 bottom end built, flat top pistons, valve release, stock head 862s, running boost cam. That will work. 1987 Buick LeSabre Cruiser, State Wagon, even better. LQ4, sloppy stage 2, 4L80, 308 gears. I think 13s is possible with that if you get the thing to hook up. Are small block Chevy and LS power outputs comparable? I don't think that they are. Not if you compare them in equal displacements. And if you look at the factory stuff, the last factory, like the Vortec factory truck motor, the 350, was rated at 255 horsepower. And then if you look at the ratings for a 4.8 or a 5.3, they're all going to be much closer to 300. Turbo on a moped would be awesome. The Chi class cars are very cool. So there are turbos and blowers for those Chi class cars. Days, luckily you have the internet for you now. You can go on and search get all kinds of information on turbocharging. A mini cup car, that'd be cool. Pertinent, you sent me an email today. 26,995 16 LS springs on your 2.2. They drop in or good as 600. So do they use the stock retainer for that? I've never tried the Texas Speed Torquer cam. How do you feel about the comp oilless turbos? The only one I've ever tried was way back when they were first starting out and it killed itself. I'm assuming that they've fixed all that. So, but I've never tried one after that. Would it be worth going from a small block Chevy 383 to a 7-liter LSX style engine? Well, you'd make a lot more power. I still have the Nova. But it won't have the Nova probably won't get an LS in it. If it does, it probably would get a simple carbureted one, maybe. I haven't seen the Lamborghini. Ben, you make a big deal out of properly gapping the rings in your junkyard motors. Have you ever run gapped factory rings against a gapless design for power output? No, I haven't. I know when we changed the gap on the factory rings that it didn't change the power. So we didn't lose anything from doing that. Yeah, the garage dual racing, that's good stuff. 774-16 retainers. Okay. What size is the valve stem diameter on that 2.2? Have you ever tested any turbo LS D-stroke engines? Yes, the video is up. I did an LS3 block with a 4.8 crank and a custom rod and a custom piston. And then I ended up running that also with a turbo. And guess what? It did exactly what you would expect of a turbo motor. It made NA power. And then when we added boost to that, it added boost to that. It added power. The Nova needs the Atlas. I think that that would be a very good combination. Would you tighten up the lobe separation on a carb LS? No, I don't. You can. Tightening up the LSA on any cam, on any motor, whether it's carbureted or fuel injected, will have some kind of result. Usually it picks up power in the low and mid range, and sometimes all the way to 6,000, depending on what your cam timing is. So whatever it does, it will do that whether the motor's carbureted or fuel injected. Well, let's see. What cam and springs and push rods do you need to get a 302 to turn 6,500? 6,500 is not hard with a single plane and that XFI 236 cam that Comp makes. Even in a 347, we'll go to those RPMs. In a 302, it certainly will. And we did a hydraulic roller cam. You need to have enough spring rate. So a spring rate for hydraulic roller cam is going to need to be 160, 170, even 180 on the seat, and then 400 open. Do you find matching brand of cam and heads is preferable? I don't know what you mean by that. So that the same manufacturer? Mike, you've been here long enough. You know the answer to that. How much gap would you run on a set of rings on an 83 millimeter piston, 20 plus PSI? We do like 7 thousandths per inch of bore. So we can calculate that out. Hydro boost brakes. Or Jake brake. If you're going to pull the pistons to check the stock bottom in, might as well gap the rings also. Yeah, I don't think you definitely should. Don't forget to like, share, subscribe, ring the bell, do all that stuff, right? So who else can I get to port a set of V6 heads? Andy, the guy at what the heck is the name? He's got some good head porters here, so I might have him do it. If there's somebody else that you guys can recommend, that's not going to be, you know, $1,800 or $2,000. Do you find that manufacturers do a good job of building cams to match their own heads? Well, airflow, you mean like airflow research cam and heads or trick flow cam and heads? They're not going to be absolute. There are other cams that will work equally well, and the cam is just the cam. So if your cam has certain specs, it will do a certain thing on that head. It doesn't have to be from the same manufacturer. Yeah, I don't know if Dulcich is going to be big on porting the V6 heads on iron ones. The 5-cylinder I would like to test, especially the Atlas version. Do you have to gap rings? You should always gap the rings if you're running boost. Yeah, I agree. I could port the heads, but but they're not going to turn out very well. Stage 4 Pro LS 238, 246. That's really big. Is this cam a good match for twin 61 millimeter turbos? It's way more cam than you need for two 61 millimeters. Just porting, no guide work or surfacing. We can surface them, but what needs to be done to them, as you know, they need to have bigger valves put in it. They need a valve job. They need to have bowl work done. They're going to need to have port entry work and short turn done, and they're going to need to have the chambers polished. The chamber polishing I could do, and I'd also like to, especially if we put bigger valves in them, I'd like to unshroud the chamber. I didn't see that, at least on the photos I saw of the other ported heads that were available. I didn't see them unshrouding the valve. And I would like to check that maybe even on a junk head that I could get from the wrecking yard, because we've always found fairly good flow from unshrouding the valve. Thanks, Pertinent. The problem with testing low tension rings versus standard high tension rings is that you have to get them in the same thickness. And sometimes that's hard to do. Usually when they go with really low tension rings, they're also going to be very thin. And so you have to change the piston too, unless you want to do ring spacers. Nobody wants to spend 1,000 hours porting heads. No, I wouldn't. Extrudone is still around, but I guess I could talk to them. You should teach yourself to port in some junk heads. Actually, I could have Dulcet show me. He's pretty good at it. Which CNC head would make 550 NA horsepower on a 5.7 LS1 carb combo? Steve, take a look at the video I have up on the 5.7 liter LS1 that we made 575 or 580 with. We used the tunnel ram with 2 carburetors on it because we used the high ram. And I think that we used a lot of the CNC heads. You could CNC a factory 243 head and it would do that. A TrickFlow 225, probably a TrickFlow ASCAS 220 would also do that. The airflow research. So there's lots of good heads out there. JZ Love, I think that cam's too big for what you're trying to do with 61 millimeters. You don't need a cam that big. Go do a class with David, yeah. He invited me back. I might go do that, but I don't want to do porting, and I certainly don't want to do iron head porting. Tim, I would love to have Eric do it. I can talk to him about that. I can reach out to him and see if he would want to do it. I've done porting on LS aluminum heads. They turn out okay. The head I was talking about is ready to bolt on with big valves already in it. You can have it if you do a big bang 2 charge on the 2.2. So do you mean a twin charge, like a blower and a turbo on a 2.2? I don't know how we would put a blower on that. Yeah, I wouldn't be porting anything for my buddies. I wouldn't have any buddies after that. Okay, guys, I got to get going. Thank you all for showing up. If you have suggestions, let me know on the head porting. I can reach out to David Weisart. I wouldn't have him do that because that's way too much work. But Eric might be able to do it. He's really good. So we'll see what happens. So I got to figure it out. But I want to do ported heads on it because if we're going to do a big bang, it has to have a cam. It has to have ported heads. It has to have some kind of decent intake manifold on there. And then we have to have lots and lots of boost. I will see you guys all tomorrow.